On today's episode of the Glad Trad podcast, I am joined by Kennedy Hall. He is an author and a voice actor and entrepreneur extraordinaire, and also one of my new favorite Catholic YouTube channels that have popped up on my radar this year. We're going to discuss a myriad of fun topics, Kennedy's reversion back to the faith, as well as his subsequent canceling by the mean COVID police. We're also going to talk about the Society of Pope Pius X and the work of the SSPX in Canada. And of course, we're going to talk about the general state of Catholicism in Canada. Can they even go to mass? Are all their churches being burnt down? I don't know. So I decided to ask the man himself. Hey, a great shout out to all of our patrons who help make our show possible. Please head on over to patreon.com/GladTrad podcast. A lot of benefits to your liking, and we appreciate each and every one of you that supports the show. And if you haven't already, like, comment, and of course, subscribe to the channel. And now, without further ado, this is the Glad Trad podcast.
This is the light which shall give revelation to the Gentiles, the mystery of God in the world, for the salvation of the world.
How's it going, everybody? This is Jordan Pacheco from the Glad Trad podcast. I hope you're doing well. And with me today, I'm very excited because I would argue that my guest across from me probably has the best beard in the traditional Catholic movement. I don't know if you think that's true, Kennedy, but you're certainly in the running.
Well, I think Brian Holdsworth dyes his. So I'm just kidding. I probably should because I've got 6 kids now and each kid gets grayer and grayer. So anyway.
Well, this is good, right? Because that shows the wisdom, the experience, you know, that they haven't been able to kill you yet. But see, I feel so self-conscious, right? I have this like short little thing going on here on the bottom of my face, and it's so cold here in Denver that I wish I had just like the whole kind of bear man thing going on. So I know that you sell beard balms and stuff, so I'm hoping maybe I'll get a couple from you at the end of the show.
Sounds good.
So obviously you are in the Great White North, and I'm clearly on a streak because you're the second Canadian I've had on here in the new year. So I don't know whether that bodes for me, but I wanted to kind of talk about a few subjects that people have been curious about. First off, for you personally, you've kind of popped up on my radar of just different people I listen to on podcasts and YouTube pretty recently. And I was kind of going back through your roster, and it seems like only up until a year and change ago is kind of when you started your channel and everything. And it's kind of been exciting to see the growth of your subscribership. And I feel like you also have a really good voice for not just traditional Catholics, but traditional Catholics who are not just like strictly American or something. It's kind of cool. So, what is your background? I think it might be the easiest kind of thing to start off with, because obviously you didn't just appear from thin air.
Well, yes, and I have to be selfish, shameless. I'm an entrepreneur now, and I didn't used to be, and I'll explain why. But I am an audiobook narrator as well, hence the fancy audio equipment and stuff. And I have a sound booth. So if there are any, I know you're with the Augustine Institute. There's any, my kids love listening to the St. Francis series and the St. Patrick series. So anyway, any audio book people who need somebody, you can go to kennedyhall.ca. Anyway, point is, yes, I am a Canadian. I'm actually wearing right now Montreal Canadiens sweater, and it's Montreal Canadiens hat. I don't usually wear a hat inside. My dad would be horrified. His dad was a military man. He died a long time ago, but he was an English Canadian military man through the war and stuff, and you're never supposed to wear a hat inside. But I do have a sort of a teen wolf hair thing going on because we had a baby, holidays, we all got stomach flu. My barber, I live out in the sticks. Barber's 45 minutes to an hour away, depending on the weather. So I haven't had a haircut in like a month and a half. So I'm looking pretty shaggy. So that's why I have my hat on. So I apologize if there's any old Commonwealth ladies there who are appalled at my decorum. It's not my usual thing, but it's a Montreal Canadiens hat as well. So anyway, point is, I was a teacher, a Catholic high school teacher, and I had a major reversion to the Catholic faith. I was raised in an Italian household. My mother's an Italian immigrant. My dad's Canadian, English, pure blood English background as far as it goes. But I was raised by my mother's side. My parents divorced when I was very young. I grew up speaking Italian. I lived in Italy for a bit as a kid. So the Italian culture obviously is filled with pictures of the Virgin Mary and all these beautiful things, but we didn't practice as a family. So I did have my sacraments. I eventually graduated from the Catholic Church when I finished high school, as you do when you go through one of those parochial schools. And early mid-20s, had a sort of crisis of faith for a lot of different reasons. I do chronicle that to a degree in my book, Terror of Demons, which is about reclaiming traditional Catholic masculinity. And I came back to the faith, mainly through Our Lady of Guadalupe, story told in other places. And at the same time, I was teaching I got a job as a teacher. I wanted to be a football and a rugby coach and do the whole high school teacher thing. I was going to do that since I was about 12 years old. And I got the dream job. Problem is, I became a traditional Catholic. I think you had Paul McCusker on, who is a hero of mine, by the way, because of all his amazing work. My children, we have listened to the Narnia series he did with Focus on the Family like 17 times.
You know, gotta tell him. I'll tell him tomorrow.
Well, you know, our where we live, we're in southwestern Ontario near Lake Huron. And so everything is half an hour away from us. So we got a lot of time to listen to audiobooks. Anyway, but so I was a teacher. I had this conversion to become one of those Taliban Catholics you and Paul were talking about your one show. And I worked in this Catholic system, Catholic in name only, sadly. You know, they're flying pride flags, all that kind of stuff. Now it's no good. Yeah. And so I was in trouble all the time. Now, I was never in any official trouble because I never actually broke the rules because I was teaching religion and we were supposed to follow the curriculum. And thanks be to God, it actually followed the catechism. So I would just cite my stuff. I would literally give my students notes. I would say, I'm teaching you this. Write these numbers and letters down on your page. Like, what are these? It's like HS.478. And I'm like, that's the strand in the curriculum. So when your parents get mad what I'm teaching you, I can't get any in trouble from the superintendent. That's what I was going through. And but eventually there was this thing called COVID that happened. You guys might have heard of it. And I pronounce it communism, but it happened really bad here. You've heard of this guy, Justin Trudeau. He's not so much of a very nice guy.
Yeah, very smart guy.
He's not very good. And so basically, as soon as it started, I was hip to the silliness of it. Let's put it that way. Just from a basic metaphysical perspective, I was like, this is weird. So I expressed my opinion, and I got in a lot of trouble for that. It got to the point where I was actually, I had to go through a sort of trial with the Ontario College of Teachers. So you've heard of those doctors who go through their trials with their, well, actually, Jordan Peterson, he went through that trial with the Ontario Licensing Board for Psychiatrists. Wow. I went through something like that. I'm just not famous. And so I didn't do a big GoFundMe or anything like that. So I just went through it in the background, and I was told by the Ontario College of Teachers that I was a really bad boy. And I was actually told by the lady who disciplined me, although I'd already resigned. She told me that my beliefs supported by Catholic doctrine constituted abuse of my students. And I was teaching Catholic students. Yeah. Goodness. So in 2020, I had to change careers kind of out of nowhere. And thanks be to God, I have many faults, but I can write decently well. And so I was able to self-publish my first book, Terror of Demons. It's with Tan now, but it did really well. I mean, it was shocking. I mean, it was a grace. It was a gift from God to get me on my feet. And then I started sort of just falling into the whole, what the heck am I going to do now? Okay, everybody's on computers. Maybe I'll talk into my camera for a bit. So I hopped on with the Fatima Center, and I got a part-time job with them. They're actually from Canada, and some individuals in there would go to the same chapels I go to. So it was a very close connection. And then I started doing videos for them. They started doing very well. That was also during the time of the Trump stuff and the Vigano stuff and the election stuff and the everything stuff. You know, that 2020, 2021 was like bananas. So you could pretty much just put Trump or Vigano in a headline, you get 100,000 views. And that kind of got me out there, though. And then I got on with LifeSite News as a journalist, did that for about a year and a half. Love LifeSite News. It was great. But then my wife got really hurt a year ago. We were skating. She hit her head on the ice. She was a beautiful skater, figure skater, but just flukes happen. Yeah. You know, cracked her skull, brain bleed, contusion, all this kind of stuff. So I had to take a ton of time off work, and then I had to sort of figure out what I was going to do. And all these things came together. Audiobooks started happening. I wrote another book about the SSPX. I started writing freelance and all. So basically now I'm at this point where I've sort of fallen into this thing where I'm now this entrepreneur, and people ask, like, what are your qualifications in Catholicism? And I don't have any other than after I had my secular degree, I had this massive conversion, and I'm a voracious reader. And, you know, I don't have a master's, I don't have a PhD. I'm not going to pretend to. I'm not Dr. Marshall. I'm Mr. Kennedy Hall. And but I can say, I mean, as God is my witness, I've made sure I've read through, your graduate level stuff on everything to make sure I know what I'm talking about. And that's basically where I've found myself now.
Well, and praise God for it, because for my radar, I one thing, and I haven't read it yet, but I will, because the shelf is a little empty, as you can kind of see. But obviously, like, you have books, you talked about Terror of Deep. It's congratulations on it being with Dan, and congratulations on the success. You've written a very comprehensive condensement of defenses on the arguments of the Society of Pius X. And I think that's been very integral. I have a good buddy, Nick Cavazos at the Traditional Thomist, who does the same sort of thing, just he doesn't have a book for it. And I've of course found a lot of those arguments very, very compelling as I kind of figure out where I'm kind of just sitting with my own Catholicism. This was interesting. I didn't know that you were a revert. So growing up, did you attend, were you still like it was every Sunday kind of mass? Were you an altars boy? Did you go to the traditional Latin mass, or was it just kind of Catholic in name only?
We almost never even went to Christmas mass. We were so unpracticing growing up. We weren't even the Creaster Catholics. But I write about this in the intro, the dedication to my Terror of Demons book. By the way, for listeners, I think it's still on sale. You know how Tan does that $5 sale? I bought 60 copies because it was cheaper for me to get it than as a publisher price. So if you want copies of it,
Great.
I think it might still be $5, but for now, until they do their next printing or whatever. But in any case, my nonno, God rest his soul, Giuseppe Viani, my mom is an Italian immigrant. She came over in 1967. She was 10 or 11 years old. And I was very close with him. In fact, last sort of year before they had gone into a nursing home, the last few months, that was between teachers college and my first job. And my sort of, university summers are 4 or 5 months. My last sort of summer job was, I just went to his house every day and took care of him and my nonna. And he was a very faithful man. He wasn't catechized. He was a very simple man. He was born like 1930 or something, and lived through the Second World War in Italy, and didn't get much schooling. And so he could read and stuff, but he wasn't a lettered man by any means. Sure. He didn't ever read the catechism. He just knew his faith kind of in a tangible, three-dimensional sense, if that makes sense. Like it was, he could feel it, he could touch it. He was 42 years old when they changed the mass, and so he kind of grew up in that old school Catholicism. So it was in his veins. And my wife and I were married. We're expecting our child. All these things are happening, and I'm kind of at the point where I'm thinking, I wasn't an atheist. I was a searching, agnostic-y, thought I was smart, but I really was dumb kind of person. And I just realized if there was any man that I ever wanted to be even if I could be half the man he was, I would be twice the man I am now. And so I thought, he's a smarter man than me. He's a wiser man than me. And he loves the Lord, and he kisses his crucifix, and he tears up when he thinks about Il Signore, il Padre Eterno, as he used to talk about him. And he had this saying he used to say to me, and I'll translate, but he said, Kennedy, si mangia, si beve, si va a vedere il Signore. We eat and we drink and we go see God. And I thought, that sounds kind of cool. So I want to go see God one day. I like the eating and drinking, but I got to do something else. So I had to look into it. And C.S. Lewis says, be careful if you're a young atheist or agnostic, because God is very unscrupulous. If you give him an inch, he takes a mile. And that's kind of what happened to me.
That's beautiful. So it's one thing to kind of revert back into the faith. It's one thing to be teaching in a Catholic high school, all these things. But traditional Catholicism, and this would have been, would this have been around the time of Summorum, or would this have been before Summorum?
Oh, long after. I mean, I'm talking 2018 is when So
gotcha.
2018 is when I found tradition.
Wow. Okay.
Late 2017 or 20. So 2014 is when I started coming back to the sacraments.
Sure. Was your wife Catholic, or
she's Catholic like me? She's Catholic
gotcha.
like me, like was, Irish background and stuff, but never practicing really. I think they did go to Christmas and Easter mass. But as far as tradition, it's funny. In 2015, I took a group. I have a degree in Spanish, which I've never used professionally because what am I going to do with a Spanish degree? I was a French teacher. and I taught religion in French. I was a French immersion religion high school teacher. But anyway, but I do speak Spanish very fluently, and because of my Italian background, I can do the accent very easily. And but I have the Spanish. So as Providence would have it, in my first year teaching, this woman that I met, who was she was sort of not a chaplain, she's not a priest, obviously, but in the high schools they have these like chaplaincy leads. Mm-hmm. She does she makes sure they have their ceremonies and stuff in the school. Very faithful woman. She ended up becoming the godmother to our second child, her husband as well. And her husband, I think he did his master's at Augustine. I think they live in Michigan. They're living in Michigan now, doing something with Renewal Ministries or something. But anyway, so we had met at this event that new employees got to go on. It was basically just this, whatever teacher conference thing in Toronto. And we just became friends. And she's one of those charismatics. So she's always trying to find out what the Lord is telling her. And you swing and you miss, but sometimes you hit it. And so she said, I think the Lord wants me to take you to Mexico because you speak Spanish, right? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, do you want to go to Mexico? And I said, when? And she goes, last week of February, first week of March. And I'm like, well, there's 3 feet of snow outside. So yes, I'd like to go to Mexico. And I didn't know what a Marian apparition was. I was such an idiot. So she's like, we're going to go see Our Lady of Guadalupe. I'm like, it's 25, well, it's Celsius. So it's 80 degrees. Sounds great. And so we go to Mexico City. I was definitely open. I wanted to be a Catholic and all these kinds of things. I'm not a mystic. I'm not going to give any crazy stories about this and that, but that was one of those moments where, I met the Virgin Mary and she changed my life and it was never the same. And I cried a lot and I prayed a lot and I prayed the rosary like crazy. And I just, I'm a big guy. I'm about 255 pounds. I'm a recovering fullback. And but I was on that marble floor at the shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe with my little plastic rosary, praying it like multiple times through. And I didn't care. I didn't care about my knees. It was just, I didn't even feel it because I fell in love with the Virgin Mary. It was really special. So after that, there was something in my bones. You think back to my no, he was this old school man. And I just thought, man, oh man, the state of the world and the state of men nowadays and how we're so unvirtuous. And then, it's partly society's fault, but they were just missing something. Yeah. And I kind of felt that in the church. I was like, I'm going to mass and God bless these men who are trying to do their best in the Novus Ordo and stuff. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you got Susie and Tammy. They're up there with the hand sanitizer, handing out Holy Communion, and like it's just the most unmasculine thing in the world. And I just was drawn to the old smells and bells and the manly priests and that kind of thing. So I just wanted tradition, and I didn't know what it was. And then I found some sermons online that I was looking into certain things, and these priests. I was like, where are these priests? And they weren't in the Novus Ordo. And so as happenstance would have it, or providence more like, Google, for all its faults, does not distinguish between the canonical status of traditional orders of priests when you look up the Latin Mass. So when I looked up Latin Mass near me, the only option was the Society of St. Pius X. The fraternity was 2.5 hours away. There was nothing. And I was like, what's the SSPX? I had no idea. And I looked up, did quick internet search, and I was convinced. I'm like, yeah, I can go. There's a bunch of documents telling me I can go. Fine, I'll go. And I remember the first time we went, Father David Sherry, become a very close friend, father of the spiritual father of our family. He's now the district superior in Britain. He just left at Christmas. And in 2 sentences in his first sermon, I remember he destroyed Buddhism, Lutheranism, atheism, agnosticism, evolutionism, and Protestantism in like 11 words. And I was like, we are home.
That's right. Amen.
So it was just, we had some things to figure out, from there. I mean, with the, SSPX and all this kind of stuff, we were there. So that's just kind of how we found our way.
That's beautiful. That's fantastic. And, even I remember my first I'd gone to Latin Mass a couple of times when I was in kind of late college. This would have been in 2014, 2015 here in Colorado at Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which is where I go now because I'm back home in Colorado, I should say, not living in my parents' basement. But when I was out in Los Angeles, I was attending the Novus Ordo, and I remember it was a Jeff Cavins talk from years ago, and I remember the title of it was "I'm Just Not Being Fed." And for me, it was a Saturday evening mass, and the priest was doing the annual Returning God's Gifts appeal homily. And he just said something in there. And I kind of looked around, and California, very, very beautiful churches, a lot of very deep Catholicism. You can really find it's built into the stones in a lot of places in Los Angeles, but it's also very easy to just wash it all over with everything in Los Angeles, right? And so I just wasn't being fed. I was like, I'm in the epicenter. I'm dirt poor, trying to make a life filming out here. And I need some strong medicine. And so I found the fraternity was borrowing a church, St. Victor's in West Hollywood. It was the latest mass in the diocese, 7 p.m. And I remember going in there that night in West Hollywood, right? So epicenter of everything gay in Los Angeles, because I thought it was very funny. And I'd never heard an asperges before. And the moment I heard that, I knew that I was home. So there is something so beautiful, because I'd grown up kind of in when I was younger, it was more of a hippy dippy spirit of the age kind of Novus Ordo. By the time I was in high school, we had a Polish priest who I think really helped instill some good masculine priesthood from the first time. But then it was just consistent. I'd expect from a priest in the traditional rite, okay, the homily's going to be good, the mass is going to be serious, everyone's trying to save their souls and the souls of their children. There's a lot of young people, a lot of families. It's very family friendly, all that sort of thing. So one of the things that's interesting in your story, of course, is, the SSPX is closest to you, and you're very kind of new into tradition. So it's yep, this makes a lot of sense. This is great. But obviously, especially at this time, now I feel like it feels like almost normalized. We're on bigger fish, it feels like. But there's such infighting, that, I remember the first time I went back to some friends, and I was saying, I go to mass with the FSSP. And they were like, oh no, what does that mean? Are you a schismatic or something like that? So I'm sure you've heard that all. You've obviously been able to give a pretty good perspective with your book and everything. My question is, do you kind of just sense, are we getting over this hump? The SSPX, the FSSP, Institute of Christ the King, have things gotten to a point where it does seem like there is a bit of uniting, or do you still think there's a lot of infighting still left to overcome?
It's a both and.
Yeah.
You got to understand something. How should I put this? There are two FSSPs. There's the official history, and then there are the priests. So there are some FSSP priests that are very anti-SSPX. They're just are. I get emails from people. They say what happened at their chapel or their parish on the weekend and stuff. And there are some who I've talked at conferences, and they're like, I can't say this out loud, but I think Archbishop Lefebvre is the greatest saint of the last 100 years. And, we're 35 years. I was actually born in 88, so the same year as the consecrations. Okay. And so there's sort of an old guard, and then there's a sort of kids who just kind of grew up in tradition, and they just want to be a traditional priest, and they went to the diocesan TLM or the fraternity or whatever. And that's just a seminar they went to because they want to be a traditional priest. And they have a different perspective. So I do think that amongst the laity, there was much more unity of purpose. The success of Michael Matt's Catholic Identity Conference, I went there, not this year, last year, 2022. And at that time, I was a journalist there for LifeSite News, so I had a chance to ask a question, one of the question periods, for journalist purposes. And I basically said, here we are. Here, we're looking around, and this is the traditional Catholic kind of epicenter of the United States. And are we at the point where we can finally say Archbishop Lefebvre had a point? And it was like a round of applause, for a question. And there are fraternity priests there, and there's diocesan TLMs, and there's even some Novus Ordo deacons who just wanted to show up and were like, what's going on here? Yeah. And so I think amongst the laity, yes. But there is this strong streak still against the society. Because the thing is, we're in a position now where pretty much everything Archbishop Lefebvre said would happen has happened in spades. He has remember with the Institute in Chicago, and
Oh,
Cardinal
yes.
Supich just kiboshed him. And, you know, there's a quote, Archbishop Lefebvre, 1984, when they made the indult mass thing, said, listen, you know, any liberation of the TLM is obviously a good thing, but it doesn't need rights to be liberated because it's the mass of all time. So it has its own rights, kind of thing. And he said there'll come a time where the priests who agree to this will be told they've signed something saying X, Y, and Z, and then they'll take it away from them. And I remember seeing what happened in Chicago with Traditionis Custodes, and I was like, oh, it's, you know, prophecy number 744 that's come true. Yeah. And so a lot of people, you know, and this is not like the majority by any means, but there's a vocal minority who, you know, the SSPX is bad. The Ecclesia Dei communities are the way forward. It's going to be perfect. Everything's going to be fine. And they really want to cling on to that because I think they've kind of made their living like that. So even if it's just sort of a not real living, but just sort of they've planted their flag, if that makes sense. So I think you're going to find different answers if you ask sort of the brass, so to speak, versus if you talk to the boots on the ground. I hope that answer suffices.
No, that's absolutely perfect. And I always say that, you know, I saw this as a meme once, like a traditional Catholic starter kit, an open letter to confuse Catholics. It should make us all very angry that could have been written 5 years ago. We'd be like, oh wow, it's like, how is that happening? So I'm very sensitive to that. I call it my great divorce theory. And when it comes to the questions of 1988, I think for myself, and I've had a bit of a development on my thoughts. I've been to Mass with the Society once. They have a very, very beautiful church out in the foothills called St. Isidore's. Very pretty, yes. But, you know, the fraternity, but like you, it's like the fraternity grabbed me first. You know, those are my people. I've become considerably less anxious on the question of canonical regularities and irregularities. I think people are just trying to write straight with crooked lines. I really see that in real time. So when it comes to the questions of 88, the consecrations, all those things, I think that I agree with all the arguments. I say, you know, Lefebvre saw something coming. He'd been in something. They pulled him out of retirement. They clearly wanted him to, I think that Rome was very clear that they just wanted him to die off. All the other supporters had died off. He was old. This is going to be the same thing. So I don't blame what he did. I think that those 10 priests who went back to John Paul II and were like, yo, please don't excommunicate us. Like, we're good. We want to come back. I don't blame them either, because this was like, we forget sometimes how crazy the 70s and the 80s were for people just trying to cling on to any semblance of the faith. And so I don't fault those fraternity priests for doing what they did. I don't fault the society for doing what it is. And I see, especially as you just said, like 30 plus years on from it, you know, it's that very big meme, right? Lefebvre was right. I told you so on the bottom. And I'm like, we can't just keep pretending that this was such a departure of rupture and he was set up a parallel church. When first off, that's not what Rome says. But second off, when all the evidence points to the fact that we have this tale of two churches going on, and Lefebvre didn't start it. You know, Fiducia Supplicans did not come from the mind of the SSPX. Thank you very much. You know, Africa didn't reject Lefebvre and the Holy Ghost Fathers. So I'm hopeful, because I find like a lot of people are just, we're so blown off course by all this confusion, and it's good to just focus in. And at the end of the day, it's like we have an obligation to all tenets of the Catholic faith, of course. But sometimes I really am convinced God writes really, really straight with crooked lines, you know?
Yes. And, you know, I give a robust defense of the canonical stuff in my book. And there is a good, I mean, it's like anything with law. I mean, I had to cover these cases of these doctors. Like when I was working for LifeSite, I had to cover these cases of these doctors who were being brought up against the government because they were a bunch of, you know, conspiracy theorists who thought that you can't make a good vaccine in 5 minutes. And, you know, how dare they be so irrational? And, you know, so they're up against it there because they gave mask mandates or vaccine exemption letters and stuff to people and whatever. And I'm watching the Crown, what we call the district attorney, we call him the Crown attorney. I'm watching the Crown versus the lawyer for the doctor and stuff. And by the letter of the law, the Crown attorney had a point. By the spirit of the law, the heroic doctor was exactly correct. And the letter killeth and the spirit giveth life. Obviously, we don't arbitrarily reject the letter, but I always use the example, you know, if your wife is in labor and you're driving, what miles, 75 or 80 down a 35 road, you know, it's like 130 in kilometers or whatever. You're driving fast. You're not supposed to do that. You're blowing through red lights. If a cop pulls you over and he sees that your wife is screaming and the head's coming out, he's going to say, holy expletive. You know, get behind me and we're going to go through all the red lights together. And if he doesn't do that and gives you a ticket, he's probably going to get disciplined by his job because, yes, you're breaking the law in the positive sense, but in as Aquinas says, necessity knows no law. That's, the purposes of laws are for the common good, for the good of the citizenry and so on and so forth. In the church, it's the same thing. The code of canon law is for the good of the church as far as laws are concerned, but the applications thereof can't foresee all possible circumstances because positive light's impossible for us. We think back to the Old Testament. There were even exceptionalities to divine positive law. King David, we remember he ate the bread of the presence. He wasn't supposed to. Why was that? Well, because they were starving. And also because there wasn't a priest around and they have to consume the sacrifice because it's not a sacrifice must be consumed. So he fulfilled the requirements of the law in an exceptional way. And these are themes that go throughout church history. There are many examples I cite in my book. I don't have to do it here, but many examples. And Archbishop Lefebvre decided that he believed there was a crisis in the church. And to this day, there have been no traditional bishops consecrated. Even the Opus Dei, they don't have a prelate anymore. They don't have a bishop, So, it just, he acted in a crisis, and Christ tells us a prophet's never accepted in his own country. The French bishops really didn't like Lefebvre. And years later we go, okay, history vindicates him, man. And I think that's just where we are. Yeah.
I'm very glad you pointed out, even with the Poor Institute, or even the Canons regular up in Chicago. I mean, just getting raked over the coals for nothing but existing, honestly. So this is actually such a perfect thing there, because obviously you are our great neighbor in the Great White North, down in Ontario over there. So it's interesting for me. Like I saw last year and change, right? Pope Francis visited Canada. I don't exactly remember what parts of Canada, but you remember, of course, there was this whole thing about how, you evil Catholics, you guys keep on, they do this in the States too, right? It's like, you guys keep building over the graves of all these natives. Y'all had churches burnt down and things. So I know there's a lot of, that's the kind of sensational news that we get down here, right? And it sells. And we also go, oh no, like they should all just come down here where the water is great. No, not really. Just don't go to Chicago. So I guess the question is, where do you find, I mean, you love being Canadian and you love being a Catholic in Canada. And so what is kind of the overview? I know it's such a big general argument or a question, but the overview of the state of Catholicism in Canada. You've gone through this stuff. You've gone through the school systems. I see all this news that comes out of Catholic and name only schools and everything, but surely there's got to be a lot of very positive boots on the ground things going on too. I don't know.
Yeah. So, Canada is, my province alone, you could fit 3 states of Texas in it. And we have 1/3 the population of the entire state of Texas. Canada's empty. It's massive. A lot of it's uninhabitable in the north, obviously, but it's huge. So, I've never been to Alberta. That's where Brian Holdsworth is from, for example. I've only been to British Columbia, the East Coast, and I've been to Quebec, and that's about it as far as Canada is concerned. And but it's huge. So there are massive differences. We're talking hundreds and thousands of kilometers in between urban centers. So there are huge differences in lifestyle and culture and across the country. We even have different accents. It's not as crazy as in the States, but if you go to Newfoundland, it's like, what the heck was that? I did a gig in Saskatchewan out in farmland. And I said that Saskatchewan is my Hicktown, nowhere, Colorado, just with different accents. I loved it. Yeah. And it's, the state of Catholicism in many ways is pretty bad. But what's interesting is the bishops of Canada, God bless them, there's some decently conservative fellas. Alberta tends to have the best ones. But they're pretty apathetic. It's all, what I mean is they don't really do much as far as like, they're kind of just company men. So they don't come after trads. They don't support trads. They just kind of are there. There's a few exceptions. There's some decent ones. The Bishop of St. Catharines, Ontario was actually quite good. But they're just kind of there. There's no Stricklands, but there's also no Cardinal Supiches. There's no Cardinal Burkes, and there's no McElroys. They're just kind of there. And so the SSPX is really big here relative to how many Catholics there are. I think there's about 20 to 30 mass centers around the country with consistent traditional mass. And I think there's like 6 or 7 fraternity locations. Again, because the SSPX kind of just goes where they think they are invited to go for the faithful, whereas the fraternity has to, find a diocese place. So it's a different setup. There's no Institute of Christ the King in Canada. Toronto, Hamilton, Montreal, they do have a decent amount of Latin masses, diocesan-wise. But otherwise, it's kind of the Wild West. So, my province of Ontario, it's technically conservative. It's like conservative if Mitt Romney was your governor. It's like, what does that even mean? It's like, okay, the budget's kind of good, but it's a bunch of liberals. So that being said, we have no rules on homeschooling in my province. Don't tell the government. They probably aren't watching. Maybe they are, because I'm probably on some list. But, there's no rules. Like my wife and I, we just homeschool our kids. We've never had to register them for a single thing. So we kind of have like this amazing amount of permission to just kind of do whatever we want. So we go to the traditional mass. We our kids, my wife homeschools them traditional wise. We've got all these amazing friends in this chapel that's growing, and it's like my life is actually amazing as far as being a Catholic. I have no impediments. COVID was bad for everybody, but it wasn't particular to the churches. It was just bad. So on the one hand, it's kind of like a California with all the silly leftism, but on the other hand, it's kind of like a North Dakota or a South Dakota where there's just too much space and too few people for them to keep tabs on everybody. So it's kind of in the middle.
That's fantastic. I want to ask her quick, because does this mean that you and your wife, you guys started homeschooling during COVID? Was that even a decision prior to?
No, I was teaching when we had our first child. I saw how the sausage was made. So I said, we're homeschooling.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. That's really cool that there's no rule. So it means like, your kids go throughout, presumably up through high school or secondary school, whatever y'all call it up there. And then it's like, there's no accreditation. It's like, okay, he's out. Can he go to college? Can he go out to the trade? Whatever it is.
Well, it used to be much easier for homeschool kids to go to university if they wanted to. You just kind of had to just show what you did, and they would just sort of say, okay, you're good enough, come in. Now it's getting more strict, but we do have a really good SSPX boarding boys school an hour from me. So our boys, my oldest is only 8 years old. We have 6 kids 8 years old and under. Mm-hmm. So we've got a lot of diapers going on. And they'll go there. That school is not accredited because they tried taking some government money in Alberta, and they had to shut the high school down because it was just, the money was attached to communism. Yep. So now what they do basically is they go through this amazing curriculum. It's amazing. It's a traditional Catholic curriculum, and they live at the school, and it's very different than people are used to. It's very difficult. It's very hard, obviously, but they come out as very well-formed Catholic men, ready to do things that most 18-year-olds can't do, right? Mm-hmm. And so if they want to go to university or something, they basically have to. Well, there's little things they do where they'll get accreditations through online stuff, or they'll have a school in the States, like an SSPX school that is unofficially a sister school, and they'll send in their work as if they're a distance students, get a diploma from Iowa or wherever it is, and then they accept that. So they just kind of find their ways, but you can do it, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. It's very interesting to me that you said earlier in the conversation that there are 30 plus kind of different chapels, it would be, of the SSPX all across the country. There are some places here in the States where the SSPX has essentially working alongside the regular, canonically regular parts of the diocese, if you will. There are some bishops who are pretty friendly to them. There are some bishops who are pretty hostile. I mean, I hear about the state of, you experienced it full force, the state of Catholic education in Canada, right? And we have that a lot happening, especially on the East Coast, where these Catholic in name only schools are suddenly woke up and it's crazy. So is it part of maybe like the good part of the apathy of the bishops? Like there's not this strong condemnation of the society. Is it more like, all right, like those Catholics are going to keep doing what they're doing? Or is it like a particular funnel even into these very secularizing Catholic schools?
Yeah, they're just apathetic to like everything. So the Catholic in name only schools, they're flying pride flags. And then the SSPX chapels are filling up, So, I mean, they're not all fully apathetic. My bishop, I'm not going to get a Christmas card from anytime soon. That's just the way it is. But yeah, it's as I said, it's kind of like the Wild West. There's just not a lot of oversight, and there's just people don't know what's going on, and kind of people just do their own thing. Canada in general, like in the Novus Ordo, I think it's like 14% of Canadian Catholics go to mass. It's very low. I mean, it's like, it's very liberal in that sense. church attendance in general is lower in Canada because people don't know this. There is an official Canadian state church because technically the sovereign of our country is the king and he is the head of the Anglican Church. So we do technically have a state religion, but the Anglican Church is like so ridiculous. It's not even, it's unbelievable.
Is that called Anglicanism still in Canada? Like where it was
Anglican.
Episcopalianism down here? Okay, gotcha.
It's called Anglican. We held on to the English thing.
Okay.
And we haven't even talked about Quebec. Quebec is actually the worst of them all for Catholicism. Corruptio optima pessima. The corruption of the best is the worst. Quebec was the greatest Catholic country in the world. You know, they had a Maurice Duplessis. He was like a Salazar to Portugal. He was there 20 years. You know, basically ran the country like as if he was following a textbook from Archbishop or the province, as if he was following a textbook of Archbishop Lefebvre. But then after the council, he died shortly around that time, and so did the faith in Quebec. And then actually Trudeau's father, one of our least favorite persons, not Fidel Castro, his Canadian father.
Yes. Yes, please.
He was a communist, Marxist, you know, whatever and stuff. And he basically did the whole, pamphlet thing, Luther style. And they just corrupted the province with secular liberalism. And the province just was destroyed as far as faith is concerned. So, yeah, it's different in every province.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a galvanizing, therefore, with the society? Like out here, for instance, I think of how big St. Isidore's is in St. Mary's, Kansas. They just commissioned that beautiful, beautiful big church. I think that the society, one thing they do very, very well is they're very good about knowing the importance of education. I think that this is something that the Fraternity Institute are still kind of getting under their ground. So do you kind of see, even in your own particular life, do you kind of see that push? I mean, you talked about, sending your kids off to this boys boarding school. Like, that's really awesome. That's not something that with the Fraternity Institute, any traditional thing, if I'm going to do that, I have to send my kids like out to different states for that when I have kids.
Yeah, well, Archbishop Lefebvre, that was his model. That was when he was a missionary in Africa. You start a school first because you need priests. So, you got to educate them. You start a boys' school first for very practical reasons. And then, you go to mass in the gym at the school that they bought, that they turned into a chapel. And then eventually, after you've got 150 people coming every Sunday, okay, now you get a loan for you buy an old Protestant church or whatever. So, but yeah, so the St. Peter's Basilica is the cathedral in London, Ontario, Canada, where I grew up. And that's where the bishop of my diocese is. And they have, it's a city of 500,000 people, and they might have 3 times as many attending mass there as we do at our little chapel in a little town that has 200 people coming every Sunday. So, and that's the cathedral. We only have one church, and there's obviously 20 other churches in the city, but relative, it's they punch above their weight, and it has a lot to do with the education side.
So when I think kind of about the history of Catholicism in Canada, right, I think, of course, like you have these very hot spots of French culture, Ontario, Quebec, right? The 7 Years' War, here comes the British and the Anglicans. For your particular place in Ontario, is it hotspot Catholic, or is it like more Protestant with like disseminated Catholics for those that still actually practice something?
No, yeah, there are Catholic enclaves. Like, there's a quote, some Irish, one of those Irish ballads or whatever, and they were talking about how does it go? Anyway, but basically, the Irish, what a wonderful, blissfully sad history. I
would have gone with "There's whiskey in the jar," but that's okay. Clearly, I don't know.
That's a good one. I always joke the difference between the Irish and the Italians is that the Italian food tastes better, but otherwise they're kind of the same people. They're always singing these songs of sadness and things and whatever, but they're also very happy. It's weird. But
yeah.
In any case, Providence and the British Empire, the ballad, there's a line from it, something like, wherever the king would send the men, the Irish priests would follow, something like that. Because the one thing about the English is that they were liberals, like that's what Protestantism is. It's a classic liberalism in a sense.
Yeah.
So yes, they're totalitarians in some ways, but they don't have any metaphysical grounds for the supremacy of any religion beyond the idea of forcing it. So the Irish were part of the British Empire, and if they were going to be good stewards of their subjects were allowed everywhere. So, why do they have Catholicism in Pakistan. They have Catholicism in Pakistan because it was British. And because the British mission, the Irish missionary priests, as part of the British Empire, were allowed to go to Pakistan. So there are lots of parts of Ontario. Ontario and Quebec are the original provinces, with the Nova Scotia, New Brunswick.
Gotcha.
So there are many French enclaves in Ontario, but besides that, Ontario is like a Midwest kind of climate. So, there were lots of immigrants, and they would bring over people from places where they had the ability to farm the lands. There was lots of Germans, lots of Swiss, lots of Belgians, lots of Dutch, and they were all Catholics that came over. So there are actually parts of Ontario where they're historically very strong in their Catholicism. Obviously, it's not the same as it used to be, but in these areas, there's still a very strong, let's say, social conservatism. And the village we live in is like that. St. Boniface is the parish church. Wow. And there's a lot of these big farming families around where they have a lot of kids and things like that. So there's still a remnant of that.
That's beautiful. And you just said earlier, so congratulations, 6 kids under 8. Way to hate the planet, way to kill us all. Thank you very much. So I grew up on a farm. I grew up on an alpaca farm out in Elizabeth, Colorado. So I've been very big that when I have children and figure that out, that's going to be like such a huge part. And I also think it's kind of like the very trad thing to do in a way. So are y'all farming? Are y'all waiting to farm?
No, I'm a cityite, they call us. So I grew up in the city.
Okay.
But I just, I don't like liberals. So I wanted to get out of the places where they are, and they're not out here. So I just, I pretend to be a rural man. I think they'll accept me one day. I do have a lot of plaid, and I do have a lot of boots, and I wear jeans. So I kind of look like I'm supposed to fit in, but I drive a minivan. I don't have a pickup truck. I like country music, but whatever. And I don't farm, but all my friends are farmers. So I kind of live vicariously through them. Yeah,
that's so fine. Like I said, so me growing up on a 3-acre farm, it meant that I could live vicariously through my friends who had 40 acres and cows and stuff, right? We were gentleman farmers, so it wasn't like the alpacas were the mainstay, but we did like sheep. I raised a pig for a year, so now I'm living like smack dab in the middle of Denver. But you can kind of see, I went to a rodeo a couple of days ago, and so I kind of rekindled my yeehaw sort of spirit that I grew up with.
So what is Pacheco? Is that like a Portuguese background or Yeah,
that's absolutely right. So I'm adopted into a Hispanic family, Portuguese and Spanish. Both of my parents and my entirety of the extended family is from northern New Mexico. And what makes northern New Mexico particularly unique is that northern New Mexico maintained a lot of that Spanish blood as they kind of colonized, moved their way kind of up north. So Pacheco, my mom's maiden name was Bachicha. My maternal grandmother, Trujillo. I have Bernals. I have Lopez's. I got all this bread. And my uncle traced us back. Pacheco is a very, very common Hispanic name. But my particular strain is directly traced to Cortez and Montezuma because Cortez married Isabella Montezuma, daughter of the emperor. So if you were to see a picture of my father, I call my dad the last of the conquistadors because every once in a while he gets kind of his Spanish blood up. We went to the Museum of Natural History and we're looking at in the Egyptology exhibit, right? And he's looking at all these amulets and all these little trinkets and frowning, and he goes, "How many of these are just demonically possessed? We probably should just destroy them." And I was like, "No, that's your Spanish blood, Dad." Like, wait a second.
So my oldest son, Titus,
great name, by the way.
Thank you. I'm Titus and Shiloh and Clover and Samson and Clementine. No, what is it? Yeah, Titus.
Ooh, losing count already.
Titus and Shiloh and Clover and Samson and Clementine and Charles Marcel. There was this bishop named Marcel. Maybe you heard of him. And,
a little bit.
And Charles is after St. Charles Borromeo,
nice.
Who anyway. But we've got 6 under 8, and Titus, my oldest, he's very black and white with the way he talks. We have to tell him, Titus, you can't say that in public. Not that it's immoral, but it's like, buddy, you can't say that. And on the one hand, you should say it. On the other hand, it's like, okay,
tact, tact.
So, we're driving by this landscaping store, and there's these, garden statues. They're just like pagan deities, like the Hindu things that people put in their gardens nowadays. And he goes, "Dad, I think when I'm older, I want to be a Catholic police officer, and then I'm going to smash all those statues. And I was like, well, you might get fired, but that's good sentiment, son.
There we go. Well, you know what's funny is I see this quite even in my own thought, right? Things have progressed. I come from like pretty like, I guess it's nominally Republican really, because we were like good Catholics. It was just a conservative background. I'm now like reading like Charles Clom's Star Spangled Crown. I'm casually just like, I hope I'm on an FBI watch list. I hope they have my records going. Yeah, it's not saying that I destroy the federal republic system, but maybe a constitutional monarchy would make a kind of sense. But you kind of live in like the decade of a constitutional monarchy, so I don't, of sorts. So I don't quite know.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Temperamentally, this is going to sound so heretical and interesting. I'm kind of a libertarian monarchist. I know libertarian has the worst connotations, but it's funny. When I started using that word, we don't have a libertarian party in Canada. So we don't have one. I mean, so in Canada, libertarianism is like far right anarchism. And I was like, that sounds kind of based, especially living under especially living under the COVIDian regime.
Yo,
and I was
totally.
like, this government sucks. Let's get rid of it. You know? So, but I'm a monarchist in my bones, you know, for many sort of patriotic Canadian reasons. So, I just want I want Canada to be like 20 different countries. I want, I think we'll get our little kingdom going here. We'll take a little bit of Michigan. You know, they got some better hunting across the water, and you know, and we'll have these little fiefdoms. I think that's kind of how I want it, and I want there to be very few laws, and everyone has property rights. Blah blah blah. So I'm kind of this like, you know, I want the government to be about the size of maybe 2 or 3 individuals is probably enough, and I want them to have very little power over everything, and I want Christ to be king. That's kind of my pipe dream. So, but yeah, that's kind of that's my political background beliefs, I guess.
That's beautiful. Maybe you should run for premier or something when everything dies down.
I would never in a million years be able to get on a ballot anywhere. If you're a culture warrior in Canadian politics, it's a death sentence. It's not even close. So I'd be fine. I might get a lot of YouTube views, and maybe I'd get some subscribers or something, but I would be run out of town.
Well, as we wind down here, this is something that's come to mind, but obviously, thank you for sharing so much on the Canadian front in particular. I realize as we're going through this, I'm like, oh wow, this is actually the first time we've had a very serious conversation with someone whose whole identity is that they're non-American. Just kidding, by the way. totally just playing. But I think about, of course, I think about the space that you occupy with a lot of traditionalists. I think a lot of people have been able to kind of articulate, and this is why I'm very grateful to you. I think a lot of people have been able to articulate how they feel about matters of the society, matters about tradition, or things about Pope Francis, anything. I think that your channel has been very, very helpful for that, and very recent, which has been great for me. But I think about guys like you. I think about guys like Brian Holdsworth. I think about guys like Jordan Peterson. I think about the fact that a lot of my YouTube feed right now is filled with Canadians. And so is this for everyone else in the world, is Canada kind of in that, or you coming out as you guys have been? I almost feel like it's almost like the Irish monk analogy. Like, is there sort of a canary in the coal mine status that you think is unique? Because again, and this just might be media portrayal, right? But I think about, I've seen churches burning. We've had a couple of that here, but it seems like y'all got hit worse. I think about the trucker convoy, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, it feels like a lot of what goes on up north are good lessons for us here in the States or elsewhere.
Yeah, it's that, but it's also sort of like, you know, both of our countries are established on liberal principles as far as the philosophy is understood. Mm-hmm. But we were loyalists, which has pros and cons. You know, I still love my country very much, but it's changed a lot. We never had anything like a culture war in politics in Canada, but in a good sense. It was just, we're very British. Leave each other alone. Mind your business. Yep. We have customs. We follow those. Don't do stupid things. It was pretty much the Canadian, very Anglo background, the way we did things. Whereas in America, you have a culture war, but obviously you have a lot more. It's a powder keg. You know, you've got some political instability, let's call it. With Trudeau, he really did kind of change the game in a bad way. He adopted the sort of Democrat Saul Alinsky style playbook. And no one really knew what to do with it because you know, as flawed as a man like Trump is or whatever, there doesn't exist even a prototype for that in Canada. And that's the only kind of person in a liberal system, You basically just have to be a bigger bully. The conservatives in Canada have no understanding that you need to do that. They're just like, no, they're all Paul Ryans. We'll just balance the budget and we'll get a spreadsheet and it'll be great. It's like, no one cares about your spreadsheet, buddy. Anyway, the Canadian canary in a coal mine, yes. But also there's like that expression, pressure makes diamonds. Obviously, if you're going to speak out in Canada in a way like myself or anyone for that matter, and you're going to face backlash from the left, but you're also going to face a backlash because what you're doing is against decorum. We don't do things like that. It's funny. I never heard anyone talk about politics ever at any family gathering. In my extended family, my dad's got a bunch of brothers and never heard any of that. It was wonderful. I never even knew about it. But I just kind of in this position now where things have gotten so weird that I just decided to say things. And so it's hard, but at the same time, because there's so much pressure on us, it makes you be very, like, if you're gonna get into it, you're gonna be all in and you're gonna be very precise. So it's kind of a canary in the coal mine thing. It's kind of a pressure makes diamonds kind of thing.
Gotcha. Well, I'm so grateful that you came on. Give me what you're up to. Give me the plugs. Give me the website so I can send people to what you're up to. Are you still selling beard oil? Because I need some, beard balm, whatever it was. I need some.
Yes, you can go to the just go to my YouTube channel. Links for everything I do are in the link, every show notes. You just click whatever. KennedyHall.ca is my website. CA for Canada, obviously. It's funny. I wanted KennedyHall.com, but it was like $6,000, whereas .ca was like $20 a year. So I picked that one.
There you go.
And you can find links. As I said, I do audiobook narration. I just finished Confessions by St. Augustine for TAN, and Anthony Esselin did a translation of it. I've done 5 or 6 Taylor Marshall. I think I'm working on the 6th Taylor Marshall book. I did his Sword and Serpent trilogy. I do a bunch of accents and voices and all these kinds of things. It's a fiction. I'm working on the sort of 4th installment, the Nicolaus book he just released about St. Nicholas. And my books, you can find the links for that on my website as well. And I have a Substack, meretradition.substack.com. But again, kennedyhall.ca, it's all there. I put out a lot of posts and articles and some stuff for paid subscribers. And that's kind of, also, last thing I should say this. I'm going on a pilgrimage in November in Italy with Father Albert Callio. He's the last of the Mohicans. He's a traditional Dominican. And he's our chaplain. It's led by Catholic Heritage Tours. So basically, it's a traditional Catholic pilgrimage through Rome, the Amalfi Coast, and Florence. We're going to go to Assisi, all those kinds of things. So if anyone wants to spend 2 weeks in Italy, which is the best time to go in November because their summer's longer and the harvest time, it's not hot. It's comfortable. Check out that kennedyhall.ca/Italy. And I think that's all of my shameless grifting. Okay, so the last thing I should have said, I'm so sorry, everyone, I forgot. Canadian Martyrs Men's Conference. It's run by our Holy Name Society of our chapel, of our priory, and it's the only traditional Catholic men's conference in North America. Yes, there are Catholic men's conferences. This one's traditional meaning, traditional priests, traditional sermons, traditional everything, traditional conferences, and everyone who attends gets a free cigar. It's you go to CanadianMartyrsConference.ca, CanadianMartyrsConference.ca, and it's very accessible to the American border, only about an hour in Ontario, and it's filling up. So that's something for people to look forward to.
Kennedy, hey, thanks so much for joining me. Audience, don't forget, of course, type Kennedy Hall, the Kennedy Report on YouTube. That is always a great way. Such great videos. Don't forget to subscribe. And of course, if you haven't already, go on and subscribe to us here on the Glad Trad Podcast. If you want to support the show, go on over to patreon.com/Glad Trad Podcast for a whole list of tasty benefits. And we'll see you on the next one. God bless you and may He keep you. Adios.
Thank you. Thank you.